Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Those returning to the show, thank you for coming back. You know the drill by now, but if you are new here, this show looks year by year at American history, telling a linear story. Now let's get into today's episode. The United States has just held its third presidential election, and as Washington was no longer a candidate, we'll cover the inauguration of America's second president. In American politics, there's a growing divide between Federalists and Democratic Republicans, and we'll discuss the petition made by 4 freed black men to the House of Representatives. Welcome to 1797 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and Thomas Jefferson writes to James Madison, who's currently still serving in the House of Representatives, about the recent election, saying, "I can particularly have no feelings which would revolt at a secondary position to Mr. Adams. I am his junior in life, his junior in Congress, his junior in diplomatic line, his junior lately in our civil government. If Mr. Adams can be induced to administer the government on its true principles and to relinquish his bias to an English constitution, it is to be considered whether it would not be on the whole for the public good to come to a good understanding with him as to his future elections. He is perhaps the only sure barrier against Hamilton's getting in." When New York's state lawmakers adjourned in November last year, they left New York City's Federal Hall with an agreement to reconvene a few months later in Albany. The state legislature has shifted its meeting sites between Kingston, Poughkeepsie, Albany, and New York City 16 times since '77, and with this new session, beginning on January 3rd, Albany becomes the permanent capital of New York. Also on January 3rd, the Treaty of Tripoli, a peace treaty between the United States and Tripoli, is certified at Algiers after being signed late last year. The aim of this treaty is to curb the rise in pirates attacking American merchant vessels, as such ships are no longer under the protection of treaties Tripoli has signed with Great Britain. We'll use this opportunity to look into these ongoing hostilities that America is facing coming from Barbary pirates. The Barbary states are comprised of Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and these states sanction the piracy of merchant ships off the coast of northern Africa. Before the revolution, American merchant vessels were protected by treaties signed by Great Britain. These treaties were not like most, as Britain had agreed to pay the countries annually to secure the safe passage of their ships and prevent the capture of their merchants, and these agreements were backstopped with the threat of the internationally feared British Navy striking hostile parties. Operating without protection, American ships face pillaging and the capture of crew, so during Washington's presidency, American vessels in the Mediterranean sailed in convoy with European ships, flew European flags illegally, or simply took their chances with Barbary corsairs. In '95, America finally agreed to pay an annual tribute to Algiers, and in doing so freed a number of captured Americans being held in the country. This new treaty with Tripoli does not make provision for annual payment, instead making a larger one-time payment. Additionally, it prohibits the hostile boarding of ships, prevents duties from being placed on goods on ships that use ports in the territory as a matter of necessity, such as bad weather, repairs, or the seeking of provisions, requires the protection of merchant ships in a reasonable proximity of forts, creates a system by which passports may be recognized to identify merchants, and allows for the recovery and safe passage of men whose ship is lost and who land on the shore of Tripoli, as well as preventing the pillage of any goods which are recovered from the wreck. As the Barbary pirates are Muslim privateers and there's somewhat of a 1,000-year-old tension between Christians and Muslims, an interesting article in the treaty is the 11th, which states, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Mussulmen, and as the said states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mahometan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." The treaty is not, however, the end of the story. Barbary pirates are to remain a constant threat to the international trade America is trying to conduct, and we'll cover this in more detail next week. On the 11th of January, Francis Lightfoot Lee passes away. The Lee family did very well selling furs, tobacco, and English-made goods through Lees on both sides of the Atlantic, collecting an enormous amount of land. The American Lees kept up the relationship with their British cousins for many generations. When a young teenager, Francis watched his older brothers sail for England in Lee tobacco ships for their education. It's possible he thought that it would be his turn next when he was a little older, but that never happened. Francis was elected to the General Assembly, although reluctantly, and continued in the House for many years. In 66, Richard Henry Lee challenged the British king, writing the Westmoreland Resolutions, and Francis signed his brother's Seditious Act, which later gave rise to the Declaration of Independence. In 69, at the age of 35, Francis married his love Rebecca Taylor, who was 16 years old, and they built a home in Richmond County, Virginia. Lee was elected to the House of Burgesses and became good friends with Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. Francis was elected to be a delegate for the Second Continental Congress in 1775 and traveled to Philadelphia. On July 1st of 76, he wrote, "This day the resolve for independency was considered and agreed to in committee of the whole. Tomorrow it will pass the House with the concurrence of South Carolina. If our people keep up their spirits and are determined to be free, whatever advantages the enemy may gain over us this summer and fall, we shall be able to deprive them of in the winter, and put it out of their power ever to injure us again. Yet I confess I am uneasy, lest any considerable losses on our side should occasion such a panic in the country as to induce a submission." Francis and Henry Lee were the only blood brothers to sign the Declaration together. After the war, he returned to Virginia, continuing in the House and briefly in the Senate until 85. That year, Francis retired, and as he and Rebecca never had any children, they willed their inheritance to Richard Henry's second son, Ludwell, when he showed an interest in politics. Both Francis and Rebecca die of natural causes before the month is out. Now, on January 23rd, a group of freedmen in Philadelphia seeks federal protection for all freed slaves from state laws allowing their capture and re-enslavement. As the issue of slavery and what is to become of a freed black person in the United States is a contentious one, and one that will naturally resurface, and one that we have not yet allotted much time to, it seems fitting that we take a moment and get an early window into the current status quo in America. As we've briefly touched on in previous episodes, the laws in various states regarding the importing, keeping, and freeing of slaves is a patchwork. Vermont has banned slavery outright in 77, becoming the first state to do so. Through judicial review of the state's constitution, Massachusetts also prohibits slavery. New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania all have gradual emancipation laws on the books, with most granting freedom to the children of enslaved women sometime in their 20s. Under the Northwest Ordinance of '87, slavery is illegal in the territory, though it's not unheard of for there to be some extent of illegal slaveholding going on there. In the southern states, no laws exist prohibiting slavery, as the agrarian culture leaves the majority of lawmakers and landowners with no appetite for its prohibition. Some states, like the newest, Tennessee, have constitutions that explicitly permit the keeping of slaves. Finally, as it's relevant to the coming story, we should also mention that in '75, North Carolina made it illegal to free slaves unless approved by a county court. But since then, persons from religious motives, mostly members of the Society of Friends, also known as Quakers, continued to free their slaves, in some cases buying slaves in order to free them. In response, North Carolina passed another law in '88 allowing the capture and sale of any former slave who had not been freed without court approval, with 20% of the sale price going to the person who reported the illegal release. Many freed black people fled the state to avoid being captured and sold back into slavery. So it's against this backdrop we find ourselves as we recount the petition made by 4 freed black men to the House of Representatives: Jupiter Nicholson, Jacob Nicholson, Joe Albert, and Thomas Pritchett are all residents of Philadelphia but were formerly enslaved in North Carolina before being freed by their owners and fleeing to avoid capture. So let's hear directly from these men. I have not altered the quotes in substance, only removing some details such as locations, employments, and names for brevity and clarity. You can check our X for the link to the full transcript. I, Jupiter Nicholson of North Carolina, after being set free by my master, was pursued by men with dogs and arms, but was favored to escape by night to Virginia with my wife, who was manumitted. From thence I removed with my wife to Philadelphia. I left behind me a father and mother who were manumitted. They have since been taken up with a beloved brother and sold into cruel bondage. I, Jacob Nicholson, also of North Carolina, being set free by my master but continuing to live with him till, being pursued at night and day, I was obliged to leave my abode, sleep in the woods and stacks in the field, etc., to escape the hands of violent men who, induced by the profit afforded them by law, followed this course as a business. At length, by night, I made my escape, leaving a mother, 1 child, and 2 brothers, to see whom I dare not return. I, Joe Albert, manumitted by my careful guardian to protect me from being afterwards taken and sold, providing me a house to accommodate me and my wife, who was liberated, but we were night and day hunted by men with guns, swords, and pistols, accompanied with mastiff dogs, from whose violence, being one night apprehensive of immediate danger, I left my dwelling, locked and barred and fastened with a chain, being at some distance from it, while my wife was by my kind master locked up under his roof. I heard them break into my house, where, not finding their prey, they got but a small booty, a handkerchief of about $1 value and some provisions, but not long after I was discovered and seized by men who were armed with guns and clubs. After binding me with my hands behind me and a rope around my arms and body, they took me about 4 miles to Hartford Prison, where I lay 4 weeks, suffering much from want of provision. From thence, with the assistance of a fellow prisoner, a white man, I made my escape, and for $3 was conveyed with my wife by a humane person in a covered wagon by night to Virginia, where in the neighborhood of Portsmouth I continued unmolested about 4 years, being chiefly engaged in sawing boards and plank. On being advised to move northward, I came with my wife to Philadelphia. My mother was set free, my sister, and both taken up and sold into slavery, myself deprived of the consolation of seeing them, without being exposed to the like grievous oppression. I, Thomas Pritchett, was set free by my master, who furnished me with land to raise provisions for my use, where I built myself a house, cleared a sufficient spot of woodland to produce 10 bushels of corn, the second year about 15, and the third had as much planted as I suppose would have produced 30 bushels. This I was obliged to leave about 1 month before it was fit for gathering, being threatened by a man who married my master's widow, that if I would not come and serve him, he would apprehend me, and send me to the West Indies. I left my little farm with my small stock and utensils, and my corn standing, and escaped by night into Virginia, where, shipping myself for Boston, I was, through stress of weather, landed in New York, my mind being distressed on account of the situation of my wife and children. I returned to Norfolk in Virginia with a hope of at least seeing them, if I could not obtain their freedom. But finding I was advertised in the newspaper, $20 the reward for apprehending me, my dangerous situation obliged me to leave Virginia, disappointed of seeing my wife and children, coming to Philadelphia. With the testimony of these 4 men being read, the following petition is then made. We beseech your impartial attention to our hard condition, not only with respect to our personal sufferings as freemen, but as a class of that people who, distinguished by color, are therefore with a degrading partiality considered by many, even of those in eminent stations, as unentitled to that public justice and protection which is the great object of government. We indulge not a hope or presume to ask for the interposition of your honorable body beyond the extent of your constitutional power or influence, yet are willing to believe your serious, disinterested, and candid consideration of the premises under the benign impressions of equity and mercy, producing upright exertion of what is in your power, may not be without some salutary effect, both for our relief as a people and toward the removal of obstructions to public order and well-being. If, notwithstanding all that has been publicly avowed as essential principles respecting the extent of human right to freedom, notwithstanding we have had that right restored to us, so far as was in the power of those by whom we were held as slaves, we cannot claim the privilege of representation in your councils, yet we trust we may address you as fellow men who, under God, the sovereign ruler of the universe, are entrusted with the distribution of justice, for the terror of evildoers, the encouragement and protection of the innocent, not doubting that you are men of liberal minds, susceptible of benevolent feelings and clear conception of rectitude to a Catholic extent, who can admit that black people, servile as their condition generally is throughout this continent, have natural affections, social and domestic attachments and sensibilities, and that therefore we may hope for a share in your sympathetic attention, while we represent that the unconstitutional bondage in which multitudes of our fellows in complexion are held, it is to us a subject sorrowfully affecting, for we cannot conceive this condition, more especially those who have been emancipated and tasted the sweets of liberty, and again reduced to slavery by kidnappers and man-stealers, to be less afflicting or deplorable than the situation of citizens of the United States, captured and enslaved through the unrighteous policy prevalent in Algiers. We are far from considering all those who retain slaves as willful oppressors, being well assured that numbers in the state from whence we are exiles hold their slaves in bondage not of choice, but possessing them by inheritance, feel their minds burdened under the slavish restraint of legal impediments to doing justice which they are convinced is due to fellow rationals. May we not be allowed to consider this stretch of power, morally and politically, a governmental defect, if not a direct violation of the declared fundamental principles of the Constitution? And finally, is not some remedy for an evil of such magnitude highly worthy of the deep inquiry and unfeigned zeal of the supreme legislative body of a free and enlightened people, submitting our cause to God and humbly craving your best aid and influence, as you may be favored and directed by that wisdom which is from above, wherewith that you may be eminently dignified and rendered conspicuously in the view of nations a blessing to the people you represent, is the sincere prayer of your petitioners. The House debates whether to even receive the petition, with many Southern representatives opposing any discussion of slavery. Representative Blount from North Carolina, a Democratic Republican, is skeptical. He says the laws of North Carolina do not suffer individuals to emancipate their slaves, and he wants to know what evidence there is to prove these men are free, as without that proof, the House has no right to attend the petition. In response, Sitgreaves, the representative from Pennsylvania, a Federalist, said that he would reverse the question and ask what evidence Blount has to prove that these men are not free. James Madison says he should be sorry to reject any petition whatever in which it becomes the business of the House to attend, but he thinks the case has no claim on their attention. Varnum, the rep from Massachusetts, hopes the House will take all possible care that freemen should not be against having the fact examined, and that if it appears they are slaves, the petition will of course be dismissed. But if it should appear they are free and receive injury under the Fugitive Act, the United States ought to amend it so that justice should be done. Ultimately, the House rejects the petition after a vote is taken on whether or not the matter should be considered. 33 vote yes, while 50 vote no. Now, on February 22nd, an American colonel named William Tate leads French forces in a landing near Fishguard in Wales in what is called the last invasion of England, as to this day it is the last time a hostile foreign military has set foot on English soil. On March 4th, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are sworn in, officially taking the office of President and Vice President respectively, marking America's first peaceful transfer of power. Adams is one of only 2 signers of the Declaration to become president, and Jefferson is one of only 3 to become vice president. Adams being another of the 3, having already been elected to the position under Washington. In his inaugural address, Adams says, "If national pride is ever justifiable or excusable, it is when it springs not from power or riches, grandeur or glory, but from the conviction of natural innocence, information, and benevolence." While Washington soon sets off with his wife and family to Mount Vernon, he also keeps close tabs on the news of the day. Adams retains in office all of the heads of departments from Washington's administration, the Secretaries of State, War, Treasury, and the Attorney General who had formed Washington's cabinet. While en route to his 8,000-acre plantation, Washington writes to the Secretary of War, James McHenry, asking him to communicate to me occasionally such matters as are interesting and not contrary to the rules of your official duty to disclose. Using this back door to secure information from his successor's cabinet, Washington occasionally goes on to give advice and support through McHenry, all without Adams' knowledge. Now, I promised in the previous episode we'd dive deeper into the politics at play in the late election and look at why it was such a contentious one. Mainly, the public debates have to do with the burgeoning party split of Federalists and Democratic Republicans who, from here on out, we'll simply call Republicans, as is the standard in historical documents. The views of these 2 parties is best explained, at least for the nature of this show, by what each party fears more than what vision each party has to shape the country, as legislation is more often meant to serve as a limit than as an incentive. While no region, state, or even town is a monolith, geography does inform ideals, as the late election has proven. The Federalists are concentrated in the North, while southern states all lean Republican, Pennsylvania being the northernmost state to cast the majority of its electoral votes for Jefferson. Domestically, Federalists fear that too much popular democracy will lead to mob rule and ultimately favor policy that is harmful to the freedom of the people. James Madison wrote in the Federalist Essays, "The most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property." Federalists look to strengthen the country by supporting a national bank, public credit, and policies that strengthen manufacturing, commerce, and urban growth, all of which is backstopped by tariffs to protect American industries. Republicans advocate for limited federal power and stronger state governments. They largely emphasize civil liberties, at least for whites, and fear a centralized authority becoming tyrannical, many claiming that is the very nature of a strong federal government allied with financiers. And even James Madison, again writing Federalist Essays, said, in opposition to the Bank of the United States, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." Now, America is still not in the strongest position as it pertains to the ability to defend and support itself without foreign allies. Though the relative isolation of North America, it being surrounded by vast ocean, aids in the security of the country for now. And as is the case, foreign policy has an outsized influence in the political discussions of the day. So, on this topic, Federalists are largely pro-British, seeing the empire as a valuable trade partner and as a stabilizing influence. They also eye revolutionary France with suspicion, especially after the Reign of Terror, while Democratic Republicans are largely pro-French, sympathizing with the French Revolution as a fellow struggle against monarchy, and they continue to resent British influence in American affairs. It is with purpose that I point out these foreign policy tendencies of these growing parties, despite our general focus on domestic affairs, as the first test of Adams' presidency develops almost immediately upon his taking office. War rages in Europe between revolutionary France and a coalition led by Great Britain, and although America has pledged neutrality, the French see the Jay Treaty, ratified 2 years ago, as a pro-British betrayal. In retaliation, French warships seize hundreds of American merchant vessels in the Atlantic, and Adams nominates a 3-man diplomatic mission to restore relations with France. The team includes Charles Pinckney of South Carolina, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, and John Marshall of Virginia. They are tasked with negotiating peace, stopping the seizures of American ships, and reaffirming mutually beneficial commerce between the two republics. They set sail for Europe in the spring, and we'll catch back up with them this fall, but by way of some lighter topics, a few firsts come our way in the late spring and early summer of this year. On March 28th, Nathaniel Briggs secures a patent for his version of a washing machine, though thanks to a fire at the patent office in 1836, we don't, and likely never will, know what this early washing machine looked like. On May 10th, the first ship of the United States Navy, the frigate USS United States, is commissioned. On June 2nd, surveyor Charles Brodhead achieves the first ascent of Giant Mountain in Adirondack, New York, its altitude being 4,626 feet above sea level. He was measuring as he climbed using a chain, and the 3-mile ascent is said to have taken him roughly a day and a half. On the 26th of June, Charles Newbold patents the first cast iron plow, and it's widely reported, though I couldn't find a primary source, that his invention is met with skepticism by farmers over the fears that the iron will poison the soil. Finally, in July, Senator William Blount of Tennessee makes history, though in an inglorious way, as he becomes the first person to be expelled from Congress. Just to clarify, the Blount we're talking about here is not the same one from the House of Representatives we mentioned earlier. He is expelled from the Senate for treason and conspiracy to incite rebellion. The charge stemming from his scheme for Indians and frontiersmen to attack Spanish Florida and Louisiana in order to transfer those territories to Great Britain. Unfortunately for Blount, a letter in which he alludes to these plans makes its way all the way to John Adams, who submits the letter to the House and Senate on July 3rd. By the 8th, he's expelled, following a 25-1 vote. There is no criminal trial, and he actually later goes on to serve in government again, though at a state level, becoming the Speaker for Tennessee's Senate. Now, let's catch back up with Charles Pinckney, Elbridge Gerry, and John Marshall, who have finally landed in France in early October to negotiate peace after roughly 3 months of travel. Upon arrival, these American commissioners are kept waiting. Foreign Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand refuses to meet with them directly, and they are instead contacted through unofficial intermediaries. 3 shadowy French agents, later identified as Jean Hodinger, Pierre Bellamy, and Lucien Hatteville. Though in official U.S. documents, and mercifully for me, they are remembered only as X, Y, and Z per Adams' request. These agents deliver an exorbitant demand. No negotiations will proceed unless the Americans agree to a bribe of £50,000 sterling for Talleyrand, a low-interest loan of 32 million florins to the French Republic, and an agreement that America will settle the American merchants' claims against the French. The envoys from the United States are shocked and skeptical that any concessions will bring about substantial changes in French policy, so they decline, citing their lack of authority to enter into such an agreement. Now, coming back home for the 10th of October, Carter Braxton, a signer of the Declaration, passes away. Braxton was educated at the College of William and Mary, and shortly after graduating, his father died, leaving him the family estate of Newington. He marries a woman by the name of Judith Robinson, who I've seen described as wealthy, beautiful, and amiable, but she dies shortly after the birth of their second child in 1757, leaving Braxton devastated with grief. Braxton moves to England in 57, where he remains for 3 years, and during this time he becomes intimately familiar with the English government. In 1760, Braxton returned home and was elected to the House of Burgesses, where he became an active and prominent member, continuing the position until 75. The day after the first hostilities at Lexington and Concord, Braxton became a member of the Virginia Colonial Convention and played a key role in the confrontation with Royal Governor Lord Dunmore. When Peyton Randolph died suddenly in October of 75, Carter Braxton was chosen to replace him in the Continental Congress, where during the debate following Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence, Braxton continued to argue against separation. By early July, however, he had changed his mind, voting for independence on July 2nd, the Declaration on the 4th, and went on to sign the Declaration on August 2nd. Braxton invested a great deal of his personal wealth in the American Revolution. He loaned money to the cause and funded shipping and privateering. Unfortunately, the British destroyed many of his ships and ravaged several of his plantations and land holdings. He accumulated a great deal of debt and was forced to leave his estate at Sherricoke in 86 and move to a smaller residence in Richmond. Now, in October of 97, he suffers a stroke and dies at the age of 61. Braxton County, in what is now West Virginia, is named for him. On the 21st of October, the 44-gun United States Navy frigate USS Constitution is launched for the first time into Boston Harbor after 2 unsuccessful launch attempts. The Constitution, to this day, is the world's oldest commissioned warship still afloat, 227 years old at the time of recording, and we'll hear more about her tomorrow. John Adams delivers his first State of the Union address to Congress on November 22nd, and naturally, the ongoing tension with the French is a point of concern, so we're going to listen to a brief 2-minute excerpt.
Indeed, whatever may be the issue of the negotiation with France, and whether the war in Europe is or is not to continue, I hold it most certain that permanent tranquility and order will not soon be obtained. The state of society has so long been disturbed, the sense of moral and religious obligations so much weakened, public faith and national honor have been so impaired, respect to treaties has been so diminished, and the law of nations has lost so much of its force, while pride, ambition, avarice, and violence have been so long unrestrained, there remains no reasonable ground on which to raise an expectation that a commerce without a protection or defense will not be plundered. The commerce of the United States is essential, if not to their existence, at least to their comfort, their growth, prosperity, and happiness. The genius, character, and habits of the people are highly commercial. Their cities have been formed and exist upon commerce. Our agriculture, fisheries, arts, and manufactures are connected with and depend upon it. In short, commerce has made this country what it is, and it cannot be destroyed or neglected without involving the people in poverty and distress. Great numbers are directly and solely supported by navigation. The faith of society is pledged for the preservation of the rights of commercial and seafaring no less than of other citizens. Under this view of our affairs, I should hold myself guilty of a neglect of duty if I forbore to recommend that we should make every exertion to protect our commerce and to place our country in a suitable posture of defense as the only sure means of preserving both.
Before the year is out, another signer of the Declaration passes away. Oliver Wolcott was born on November 20th of 1726 at Windsor, Connecticut, the 14th of 15 children. He attended Yale College and was a graduate in 1747 at the top of his class. Following graduation, he received a captain's commission from Governor George Clinton of New York to raise a voluntary militia company in defense of the northern frontiers in the French and Indian War. After the end of the war, his regiment was disbanded, and Oliver returned to Connecticut to study medicine. He remained active in the militia in the period leading up to and including the Revolutionary War, devoting portions of each year to militia duty. He rose through the ranks, serving as captain and then major in 71, was promoted to colonel in 74, and was later named major general. Also in 74, Wolcott was elected a member of the Connecticut Council, a position he held until 86. During that time, he was also a delegate to the Continental Congress, a judge of the Litchfield County Court, and probate judge for the district. Wolcott first attended the Second Continental Congress in January of 76 and served in Congress for 7 years, except the year 79 due to illness. He, of course, voted for and signed the Declaration of Independence on behalf of his state, and on July 9th of 76, Wolcott was reportedly in New York when General George Washington read the Declaration of Independence to his troops. Wolcott marched 300 volunteers to reinforce General Horatio Gates in Saratoga, signed the Articles of Confederation, and helped to negotiate 2 Indian treaties. In 86, he was elected Lieutenant Governor of Connecticut, was a member of the Connecticut State Convention, which voted for the ratification of the Constitution of the United States in 87, and in 96 he was a presidential elector, voting for John Adams. That same year, Wolcott became governor of Connecticut, though today, December 1st, he dies in office at the age of 71. Now, back to France. As the envoys prove unwilling to agree to the French demands, Talleyrand eventually meets with them formally and drops most of his requirements, but does not agree to end the seizures of American ships. After weeks of back-channel proposals and subtle threats, it becomes clear to the Americans that France is not interested in genuine diplomacy. Pinckney and Marshall make preparations to leave France, while Gerry intends to stay in the hopes of averting a war. The news of the failed diplomacy has not yet reached American shores, but when it does, it will fill headlines across the nation, so don't miss tomorrow's episode. Well, that's it for this year. America has a new president, and naval conflicts are on the rise. Next, in 1798, we'll be diving deep into these ongoing tensions and look at the growing threats American vessels face, as well as looking at how foreign threats influence politics, technology, and legislation domestically. We are now 1 month in, as it is August 4th, 1 month in to this show premiering, which is an awesome milestone. There's 11 more months to go. I would normally do my wrap-up here where I ask you to share the show with some of your friends, and while I would appreciate that, I want to take a second and acknowledge some of the awesome listeners who have gotten in contact and done a lot to keep this show growing. Pins and Lins 1, Lysol Pionex, and 616 Art, thank you guys so much for being so engaged on our X, always reposting stuff, liking stuff, and commenting on those posts. Stay Classy 1024 and Congo Chronicler, thank you guys for your best efforts to share the show in as many places as you can. It really does mean a lot. And a shout out to Kegel Bagel 88 on Apple Podcasts for giving us our first 5-star review. I hear that getting reviews on Apple Podcasts is super important to the growth of a show, as it's the best way to get organic viewers on the platform, so that means a bunch. And a special shout out to Barry Smith at JZX_101, the first person to actually reach out and specifically say they're from a different country but still enjoying learning about the American history. They're an Aussie, so I guess I should say JZX101, but anyway, thank you for your support from down under. Like I said, this is month 1 of 12, so we're really just getting started. I can't wait to keep presenting this show to all of you and more. It really does mean a lot to get messages from anybody that's listening to the show, what you liked or what you learned, so definitely reach out if you have the time. This has been Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.